Hello and welcome to The Point. I'm Marcel Wieder, coming to you from the Peach Gallery in downtown Toronto. Municipalities across Ontario are in transition after the October 27th election. Ebola has been in the news for several months, and while there has been some positive developments, there are still heightened concerns. And a panel of experts recommending changes to Ontario's main source for liquid libations. All that and more on this edition of The Point. It's just been over 3 weeks since the City of Brampton elected Linda Jeffrey with an overwhelming 50% of the vote. Jeffrey's election marks the end of Susan Fennell's 14-year reign, which ended amid an expense scandal. Jeffrey's career started as a councillor in the City of Brampton before moving on to Queen's Park in 2003 as part of the McGuinty sweep. She served in various capacities before being promoted to cabinet as Minister of Natural Resources, followed by Labour. When Kathleen Wynne ran for leader, she was the first MPP to back her. When Wynne won, she elevated Jeffrey to Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and Chair of Cabinet. Jeffrey stepped down earlier in the year to run for Mayor of Brampton. Newly elected Mayor Linda Jeffrey joins me now. Mayor-elect, thank you for joining us today. You left a successful career at Queen's Park to come back to Brampton. What led up to that decision to toss your hat into the ring for the mayor's position?
It wasn't an easy decision, but I would say if anybody watched the newspapers and the stories that were coming out of Brampton the year before, the wheels were coming off the bus in Brampton. And with procurement scandals, expense scandals, there were just so many problems at the City of Brampton that many people had approached me over the last year. And one of the most annoying lobbyists was Premier Bill Davis. He was calling me probably every couple of weeks to have me consider it. And at the time, I had just finished working on the ice storm as Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And I really had turned my mind to what am I going to be doing for the next few years? And I swore I'd never go back to municipal politics, but Brampton certainly needed a strong hand and needed a different kind of leadership. And I decided that I had the skill set and I love my community. I hated to see it get the kind of news coverage that it was getting, and people were making fun of Brampton, and businesses were thinking of leaving, and some had chosen to leave. And I wanted a better Brampton, so I decided to throw my hat in.
Now, we had a voter turnout, which was one of the largest that we've seen in Brampton. Now, it didn't equal the City of Toronto, but for Brampton, it was a significant bump in terms of the number of people engaged.
It's still very low, and certainly the voter turnout is something I'd really like to find a way to improve in the coming years. But I think it's part of the cynicism. If people don't trust their elected officials, they think they're all crooks, is kind of what I heard at the door. And I, in Brampton's case, I can't necessarily disagree with them. Everyone on our council right now, as we speak, is under an active criminal investigation by the OPP. So the fact that voters didn't come out in the past and in this election really was a result of all the scandal that was coming out of City Hall.
Your campaign was more than just being the anti-Fennell candidate. What were the important issues you raised during your campaign?
Well, as I said earlier, accountability and transparency was a big issue, and certainly the scandal with regards to the expenses. In our case, the City of Brampton was under forensic audit by Deloitte. Eventually, got sent to the Peel Regional Police, and then it went to the OPP. It is still a very contentious issue. People learned that council had given themselves a salary increase, a pension, increased their severance, given themselves healthcare benefits outside the country, backdated it to 2010, and then raised property taxes. These were all issues that were a huge problem for a community that a lot of it's blue collar. You know, there's a lot of people working 2 and 3 jobs, a lot of diversity, a lot of ethnic communities that work very hard, very long hours try to give their children a better life than they had, are taking care of their parents. And then when they see elected officials fattening their purse and being disrespectful of taxpayers' dollars, they get angry.
You inherited a council that has some familiar faces and some new faces. But those people who were found violating the rules and are under investigation, how do you plan on working with those councilors?
It's going to be challenging, and certainly there are people, for the most part, that I've worked with in the past. I've had some preliminary conversations with all of the candidates, and I'm having ongoing conversations in the week before the inauguration. I think that they want a better Brampton, and I think that they've been stuck in a very toxic relationship with the former mayor. I like to think that I have experience chairing meetings, as I'm a former chair of cabinet, and I've worked with some very challenging stakeholders in the past. When I was the Minister of Natural Resources, I dealt with a lot of First Nations chiefs who didn't always get along. And when I was in Labor, I dealt with a lot of stakeholders that had differing views from the government. So I like to think I had some training at the province that will help inform conversations that I have with this council. I don't think it's going to be easy, and I'm not going in thinking that everybody's going to link arms and sing Kumbaya. We're going to have some bumpy rides, and certainly the fact that all of those returning councillors are under a criminal investigation is certainly going to make it a very challenging environment for the first few months. And the fact that we also have an Auditor General looking at a land use deal that happened with the expansion of City Hall, that's also problematic.
So with these dark clouds overhanging Brampton, what do you see as your priorities going into this first session of council and for the upcoming year?
Well, I think we need to address some of the accountability and transparency issues that were raised during this campaign. Certainly, a new code of conduct is important. Lowering the mayor's salary is something I've committed to doing within the first 100 days. Getting a true state of what the finances are at the City of Brampton. We've been told by the former mayor that we're in good financial shape. I don't believe that to be true. I think the city's bleeding money. We need to return confidence to businesses, to families, to people who want to invest in Brampton and know that it's a good place to raise a family and to do good work. I'm going to be having conversations about bringing a university to Brampton. Bill Davis, Premier Bill Davis, has offered to work on that goal, and that's something that I believe is important. Getting Brampton back at the table to talk with Metrolinx in the province about transit is a very important issue. I want people to feel confident that City Hall is getting business done, that is respecting the taxpayers' dollar, and that I want them to come to City Hall, want to open the doors, want them to feel welcome, and I want to attract some more businesses.
On that note, Mayor-elect Linda Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us today on The Point.
Thank you, Marcel.
Up next on The Point, Ontario readies itself as the Ebola crisis continues to spread through West Africa. Welcome back to The Point. I'm Marcel Wieder. The threat from Ebola has made headlines for the past several months. In West Africa, nearly 5,000 people have died after contracting the virus. More than 400 health workers in Sierra Leone have gone on strike amidst the crisis. The World Health Organization has declared the outbreak a global health emergency, and the threat has continued to draw nonstop coverage as cases turn up in the United States. A returning American visitor contracted the deadly disease in Dallas and later succumbed to the illness, setting off alarm bells. Meanwhile, in Ontario, people remember a situation not long ago when SARS claimed 44 lives in 2003. To talk more about how prepared Ontario is to deal with the threat of Ebola, I'm joined by Andy Summers. He's the Vice President of Region 3 of the Ontario Nurses Association Board of Directors. Andy, thank you for joining us today. We've seen images from Western Africa of the victims of Ebola. How significant is the threat to Ontario?
I think it's important that all Ontarians are aware that their personal threat to the general public is very, very low. The main issue here, I would suggest to you, is if you work within hospitals, work within healthcare itself. This is the area that we need to make sure that we have all the precautions, all the equipment, all the training necessary to deal with these these illnesses or infectious diseases that are not easily caught.
Hmm. Now, Ontario became ground zero for the SARS epidemic. What lessons have we learned from that, and how are we applying that today?
Well, I remember SARS. I remember SARS 10 years ago. I was an emergency room nurse, and I remember how surprised we were. Here we were, a very robust, well-funded healthcare system, and we didn't think that we could be consumed by SARS, but SARS very quickly did consume all of our consciousness. And here we are now, 10 years ahead, asking ourselves the same question. Have we learned anything from SARS, and do we have to relearn it again? What I would like to say is, yes, we've learned a lot, but in some sense, we need to learn a bit more. We have learned, and thankfully in our discussions with the government, they are very attentive to listening to frontline nurses. Now, here we are, we have nurses who are being listened to by the government, are involving nurses in their decision making. But yet we still have facilities and large healthcare organizations that struggle with the concept themselves of listening to nurses. We also, I would suggest, have communication glitches between ministries of the government, for example, between the Ministry of Health itself and the Public Health of Ontario, offering different instructions and different guidances to healthcare professionals themselves. And it just sort of reminds me a little bit about 10 years ago, where we had communication glitches between ministries and between key organizations in healthcare. And of course, particularly, I think in the States, they had a very similar issue where the CDC was offering directives, but their National Institute for Occupational Safety in Healthcare, NIOSH, was not agreeing with them. And this is a common issue that we're still seeing 10 years ahead, is that the culture and the philosophies of infection control are not meshing with the philosophies and cultures of health and safety.
Andy, in Ontario, we have the Ministry of Labor that's responsible for looking out for health and occupational safety for workers. And then we have the Ministry of Health. Are those two ministries working together on this issue?
I'm very comfortable in saying that at the tables that I've been sitting at, where both ministers have been there and where we've been having these discussions, that yes, it does seem like they are. They both agree that nurses' safety is paramount. Because we're very, very aware that if you don't protect nurses or other healthcare workers, you actually can't protect patients. And that was one of the key things that we learned during SARS, is that if we are not protected, then we can actually become part of the problem. So yes, I will say that both ministers appear to be very much on board, but we now need to see that realized right where those nurses are working, either in their emergency departments or in their ICUs, etc.
And we've seen in the States where a nurse was quarantined on just a suspicion of contracting Ebola. And we've had other examples in the US where nurses have been isolated after treating patients.
Well, this is a bit of a sensitive issue, I'd be honest with you. There needs to be some really good reason for quarantining anybody. And I'll be honest with you, I think individuals may need to be quarantined, but not because they simply were treating patients with Ebola. And this was one of the issues that I noticed coming out of West Africa, which is a place that right now needs a lot of resources. And a lot of people are going over there to help. We're going to be quarantining individuals just for helping out in West Africa. Now, if there's been some failure in the protective system that's there for nurses, whether it's equipment or some process or protocol, then there may need to be precautions. But I do think that some of these quarantining policies and procedures have been created to keep others calm.
Well, you raise an interesting point because the Harper government is basically putting everyone who comes from any of these countries in quarantine, even though they may not have or exhibited any signs of contracting that disease.
Not something that I think is very, very useful. If we want to prevent the rest of the world getting Ebola, we should remove Ebola from West Africa. That's what we need to do. This is one of the issues that we learned during SARS, is that you can't necessarily prevent SARS arriving or Ebola arriving. You have to deal with it at its source. So we need to provide all the necessary resources there. I'm not sure that preventing people coming from West Africa is really that wise or useful.
So getting to the source of Ebola and eradicating the disease at the source is the best prevention for Ontarians.
Absolutely.
Andy, thank you again for joining us on The Point and sharing some of your views.
Thank you, Marcel. It's been a pleasure.
Up next on The Point, is the LCBO ready for an overhaul? Established in 1927 in response to the end of Prohibition and the temperance movement in the province, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario is one of the largest purchasers of alcoholic products in the world. With annual sales of close to $5 billion, the LCBO has returned nearly $1.75 billion in dividends back to the province. In addition to the retail operations, the LCBO is responsible for administering a Byzantine set of rules for importing wines and spirits, as well as licensing establishments where alcohol is sold. An advisory panel set up by the Liberal government is recommending changes that they say will maximize profit and expand the LCBO. David Jarvis is with the Aurora Strategy Group and is a former wine importer and expert on wines. He joins us now for more on this. So David, does the LCBO need to be sold?
Well, first of all, Marcel, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak. And yes, there are two fundamental reasons why the LCBO needs to be privatized. One, they distort the economics of the market. And we can go into that in a second with some examples. And two, it's just wrong. It's an offense to the dignity of the human being that people are in a position of power where they can prescribe and tell everyone what taste they should enjoy, what it is that they should like, and it's up to them to decide for them. This is the 21st century. I have a right to choose. They do not choose for me.
So a lot of people say that part of the LCBO's mandate is to make sure that liquor is properly dispensed to those who need to receive it, meaning those over 19 years of age, and that in order to make sure that alcohol consumption is properly distributed across the province, that's where the LCBO comes in.
What they have done, what the LCBO has done is in order to promote their own, what I call mantra, which is power and pay, what they've done is they've hijacked issues and they traffic in myths and mistruths about what it is that they do to ensure that they control the power and the pay. So we talk about this issue of protecting the public. Did you know that a couple of years ago, when they actually engaged a field audit group to come in and test the ability or the efficacy of being carded, that the LCBO was the worst? 1 out of 4 people or minors were able to acquire beer, for example. The brewer retails were better, and all the other wine stores were better, and all the agency stores were better. Again, this is a classic example of how you can surround yourself with an idea to promote it and create a myth that does not really exist. They distort the market. They make it uneconomic for most people. So let's take a look at a few of the economic negatives that are going on in the marketplace. Most people assume that the LCBO is the only place to buy wine. That's not true. That is utterly not true. There are approximately 640 or 650 LCBO outlets. There are 214, if you believe the 2012 report, but I think there's a few more, agency outlets. These are people contracted in the private sector to distribute booze, beer, and alcohol. 214. At the same time, there's another 480 wine outlets, private wine outlets that are selling wine and other products to people in the marketplace. They're not the only place. What they do is they keep saying, we're the only ones that can do it, when in point of fact, there are more people, more private entities actually selling wine in the marketplace than there are LCBO outlets.
So David, about 15 years ago, the Harris government tried to privatize the LCBO, and they ran into huge public opposition. Do you think it's time now that it's possible to look at selling off the LCBO?
I definitely believe that it is time, but one of the problems that the LCBO has done is that they keep telling everyone that they've promoted they've improved the stores. There's no question that the quality of the experience has improved. And that's how they've been able to create the support. They are misleading the public. What they are not telling you is that you do not have choice. You have their prescribed choice. They are not allowing you to do what you want to do. You cannot enter that particular business. And as a result, the mechanism just begins to break down on itself. So what is necessary is to demythologize what is really going on here. We already have a quasi-private sector selling. What we need to do is make it available for everyone else.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about if, it's not time to sell off the LCBO, how can we make it better to serve the interests of consumers and the industry?
There's two key areas. One, they've got to stop saying that everything has to come through us. So for example, as an agent, you petition the LCBO to actually say you want to import wine, but they will not let you participate in the consignment system until you've generated X number of sales for a previous number of years. But there's no reason to have that restriction. So what we need to do is to simply open it up so that if you want to get into the business of bringing in wine and selling it to people, which I think is a normal expectation in the 21st century, that a rational person is capable of organizing a business and going into business, we need to open it up so that that kind of participation is allowable. Wineries should be allowed to open additional stores. It shouldn't be a legacy monopoly for a couple of people who can sit there and expand. As you know, if you go to the Loblaws or whatever, you can see the odd wine store. It should not be a special privilege on a legacy basis for a couple of people. That's just outrageous. It's insane. And what it does is, again, it completely distorts the economics of what's going on in the marketplace.
Do you think that we should be seeing alcohol sales in Walmarts or in Costco or in...
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, you will get better choice. You will find people and companies and organizations, and you can arrange it so that it's not wide open competition. You can arrange it so that it's scaled in over a period of time. But at the end of the day, what you want, this is the private economic incentive, is I want to build a business. I'm going to service my customers, and people who establish those businesses will be sensitive to it. They will find the Chiantis that the people want to drink, not the Chiantis that have been prescribed for them. The real issue here is not that the LCBO creates a dividend of 1.6 billion. It's that it should be creating a dividend of 2 billion. The wastage, the inefficiency is staggering. And every single report, the one that came out a few years ago, said exactly the same thing. We can improve the margins. We can increase the sales revenue. We can increase the tax revenue. The CDC How report that just came out in August of this year said exactly the same thing. Virtually every single study says the same thing. We will be better off. But why doesn't it happen?
So David, I have to cut you off on that point, but I want to have you back and watch what happens on this issue. That was David Jarvis from Aurora Strategy Group, who is talking about the LCBO and the future. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Over the past few weeks, it's been hard to watch the news, listen to the radio, or pick up a paper without some mention of the troubles of former CBC personality Jian Ghomeshi. What was once seen as a CBC issue has morphed its way into a national debate involving Parliament when it was revealed that 2 NDP members of the House of Commons had been sexually harassed by 2 Liberal MPs. Quick action on the part of Liberal leader Justin Trudeau to suspend the MPs from caucus pending an investigation set the Hill abuzz. The NDP also found itself on the receiving end when former staffer Ian Capstick revealed that he was sexually harassed by MPs. All of a sudden, sexual harassment in the workplace caught up with the Old Boys Club on Parliament Hill. And it wasn't limited to Ottawa, with the explosive revelation that former Deputy Prime Minister Sheila Copps was sexually assaulted early in her political career as a provincial Liberal MPP. One can also recall her being the subject of taunts by former Conservative Minister John Crosbie, who called her baby in the House of Commons. Copps would later use that remark as part of her book called Nobody's Baby, A Survival Guide to Politics. For too long, there has been a pervasive attitude of go along to get along. The unwritten rule in politics is like that of Las Vegas. What happens on the Hill stays on the Hill. Most members don't live in Ottawa. They commute from their ridings and spend long days in cramped offices on Parliament Hill. Add to that a culture that invites MPs and their staff to an endless amount of receptions and parties with free or cheap booze, and you put in place the right ingredients for trouble. Except for one thing. There is no consequences for bad actions by MPs. Staffers are too terrified of losing their jobs and having to return home in shame if they complain about being harassed. If they do stand up and complain, then it goes to the secretive Board of Internal Economy, where it is usually swept under the carpet with a settlement, dismissal, and non-disclosure agreement. It's time to put this practice to an end. Staff and MPs deserve a better process where they are not seen as the problem, but as the recipients of unacceptable behavior. The House and other legislatures need to be brought into the 21st century. Working for the people should not result in second-class status for staff. Like any other workplace across the country, staff should be able to operate in an environment that is healthy and productive without harassment. And that's the point. That's all for this edition of The Point. Catch us next on December 1st. Follow us on Twitter at WatchThePoint. Like us on Facebook and check out our podcast at watchthepoint.libsyn.com. I'm Marcel Wieder. Thank you for watching.